Recording in progress.
Shana Tova. We have this very beautiful tradition at Kol Tzedek of welcoming new babies into the covenant of the Jewish people by placing them back in the womb of Torah. Looking around the room this morning, I saw several babies who were in the precise Torah that we read from. After placing them in the womb of Torah, we then swaddle them in a talit, and we bestow upon them a name. At that moment, I am careful to say, today we will share the first of many names and nicknames this child will be known by. As a trans person with many names, I say this as much for myself as for the parents and the baby before me. Though I know name changes and nicknames are not unique to trans people, I experience this ritual as healing every time. We as a community deeply value the ability to be polyonymous, to have or be known by many names. That's a good new word, right? Polyonymous. It's a new way of saying I'm poly. Oh man. Micha mocha koach. Our names tell something of our story, where we come from, where we are going. As it turns out, this day, Rosh Hashanah, is also polyonymous. It is a day that has many names and therefore many meanings. A day that invites many journeys. The very first name of Rosh Hashanah appears in the Torah, where it is called Yom Tru'ah, referencing the ritual calls of the shofar, Tekiah, Shivarim, Tru'ah. Tru'ah is the 9-part staccato call. It seems fitting to call this day by the name of the ram's horn, which is ritually reserved for specifically and almost exclusively this holy day. And yet not this actual day. While today is still Rosh Hashanah and still Yom Tru'ah, its coincidence with Shabbat means we need to wait until tomorrow to actually hear the full call, the full Tru'ah. In rabbinic tradition, through the prayers of the Machzor and the lines of the Kedusha, Rosh Hashanah is known as Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. It has taken me decades and dozens of reminders from Rabbi Mo to remember that this name is not primarily about us remembering our loved ones, because that's Yizkor, that's coming too. Yom HaZikaron is about asking God to remember us. At its heart, the Day of Remembrance is a poetic rendering of our human longing to be blessed with long life. It is a longing to be noticed, to feel consequential. There are 7.8 billion people on this planet, and potentially up to 100 million species of life. The Holy One has a lot to remember. And here we are, squirming in our seats, crawling on the floor, raising our hands high in the air, begging God, don't forget me, look down, remember me. We also refer to this day as Hayom Harat Olam, the day the world was or is conceived, also known as the birthday of the world. Though I have always been confused about why on the birthday of the world we chant endless hours of Hebrew poetry about life and death. But it made much more sense after reading a recent article from this past week when Dr. David Destaino, a research scientist who studies the psychological effects of spiritual practice, published these words in the New York Times. He explains, "The focus on death might seem misplaced, bringing gloom to the party. But I believe there is good reason for it." He continues, "Contemplating death helps people make decisions about their future that will bring them more happiness. This is an insight about human nature that the rites of Rosh Hashanah capture especially well. Which brings me to the name of Rosh Hashanah that I struggle with the most. Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. This is the day's most recent name, if you can call 2,000 years ago recent. It only came into circulation after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This name seems to be at spiritual odds with all the others. It seems to somehow be specific to the nature of exile and diaspora, to the calling for and the longing for return and for wholeness. It led me to ask, is this a cosmic birthday party or a court date? Thanks. Which is what I want to talk about this morning. About Yom Hadin. About the day of judgment. About judgment itself. The ways we judge ourselves, the ways we judge others, and the possibility of a redemptive understanding of God's judgment. Let me begin by saying, I think of myself as a rather judgmental person. For better and for worse, it's a quality that has followed me my whole life. I am quick to assess things and slow to reassess. It is a quality that I am always trying to soften and transform, and also a quality that has made it possible for me to become myself. So what is Deen? Deen is most easily translated as judgment. It has a legalistic tone, from the same root as dayan, meaning a judge, in which we may hear the echoes of the traditional response recited upon hearing of a death, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed is the true judge. However, in the mystical tradition, Deen is understood to be an aspect of the divine. For the Kabbalists, Deen is a synonym for Gevura, meaning strength and power, as in Ata Gevurot, right? The one who is powerful, which we invoke in the Amidah. Deen manifests as discipline, discernment, critical thinking, and boundaries, all crucial and beautiful qualities. For the mystics, Deen is not inherently good or bad, but rather lives in spiritual tension with its complementary attribute, chesed. Chesed is often translated as loving kindness. It is a connecting energy. It manifests as generosity, compassion, and grace. To quote Pirkei Avot, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Amed. The world is sustained by three things, by Torah, by Avodah, and by Gimilut Chesed, by sacred teachings, by spiritual practice, and by abundant Chesed, by loving kindness itself. If Deen is so important, why isn't it on that list? Why invoke Deen if it doesn't help to sustain the world? Why are we celebrating the birthday of the world and calling it Yom Hadin? Why not Yom HaChesed? That would have made more sense to me. As it turns out, the world as we know it was not God's first attempt. One midrash describes that the Holy One first created the world entirely out of chesed. This would have been my personal instinct. A world that was all kindness and caring. But it turned out to be too fluid. It had no form. It fell apart. So the Holy One let the creative pendulum swing and created a world entirely out of Deen, out of judgment. But not surprisingly, it imploded on itself. There was no connective tissue, only boundaries. And so the Holy One, in her magnificent patience, created the world a third time, this time out of chesed and deen, love and strength, care and critical thinking. And this is the world we inherit, a world full of chesed and a world full of deen. Now, it's easy to understand why the world is sustained by chesed. At its core, we are here to express care for other people and to care for ourselves. We are called to embody a great and boundless love. We are striving to be adaptable, flexible, resilient humans. It can be harder to appreciate that Deen also sustains the world. Deen is an essential part of the creative process. One of my dear friends used to keep a Post-it note open on his laptop that read, "Good boundaries will make other people upset. And as a result, they are hard to maintain." As I imagine it, the moment when the Holy One created the world and separated the heavens from the earth and held back the waters above from the waters below, that was Deen. These physical boundaries and distinctions make it possible for the creatures of the land and of the sea to come into existence, for humans to exist. We would not exist without Deen. Our capacity to set boundaries, to discern truth, to cultivate discipline, and to think critically are part of our inherent holiness. Deen is a necessary part of the creative process. It is my own capacity for Deen that allowed me to come out as queer and then trans, to change my name more than once, and my pronouns and my body, to think critically and transform the expectations the world had for me. Anytime one of us comes out of the closet, that's Deen, manifesting in our own souls. Deen is the reason I ever make it to the gym. Thank God for the discipline of exercise. Deen is the quality that taught me to think critically about race and racism. Deen gives me the courage and the clarity to challenge white supremacy, to unlearn political Zionism, and to think critically about police and prisons. Deen is the force within us that allows us to set boundaries, to maintain routines, and to question authority. When I am well rested and feeling spacious, I'm able to connect to my truth, my role in the world, and bring the gifts of the insights and clear thinking that Deen offers. But lest we get carried away with the redemptive qualities of Deen, and since we're not always well rested and feeling spacious, Deen can also be the cause of much suffering. It can foster harmful negative self-talk. It can generate ungenerous judgments of others. My own judgments arise strongly in times of sleeplessness, emotional scarcity, often appearing as insecurity, impatience, defensiveness, unworthiness, insufficiency. I've been able to notice that when Deen is present, when there is too much Deen present, it manifests as a tightness in my chest, a clenching of the throat, heat in the belly, flushed cheeks, shallow breathing. When I am tired and stressed and overwhelmed, I am quick to judge and slow to forgive. When it goes unchecked, Deen can lead to harsh judgment of ourselves and of others. It can foster profound self-doubt, leading to depression and anxiety. It can also result from depression and anxiety, causing us to judge others even more harshly. This past year, I've been navigating a deep and painful conflict with a family member. Over and over again, I've asked myself, what can I take responsibility for? What can I say I'm sorry for? Where is tshuva in this relationship? And I keep returning to my own judgment of this person's actions. This is what I regret most. The hubris that suggests I know how to live their life better than they do. In its most harmful states, Deen leads to questions of self-worth. It makes us sad to the bone. It fosters suicidal ideation. We as people are prone to judge ourselves harshly, and it is harmful. But as we learn from the creation midrash, the world, including our inner world, is sustained by a balance between chesed and Deen. And the balancing is ours to do, each and every one of us individually and us as a community collectively. In my own experience, this balance is particularly hard to find in spiritually and politically progressive communities. There is a valorizing of criticism on the left, which I experience as harmful. I have felt in my own bones the ways that critique can become our reflex rather than our intentional response. I feel this most in the depths of cancel culture. In her book, We Will Not Cancel Us, Adrienne Marie Brown explains, call-outs have a long history as a brilliant strategy for marginalized people to stand up to those with power. But right now, she continues, call-outs are being used to shame and humiliate people in the wake of misunderstandings, contradictions, conflicts, and mistakes. Instant judgment is a practice of power over others, not with others. This is an overused Dean muscle. These practices erode trust between people and make it hard to build relationships, community, and movements for justice. Which is not to say we don't need Dean on the left. Dean is so important for social transformation and justice, for voicing criticism, for protest, for speaking truth to power. But Dean, like every muscle, can be overutilized and it can be underutilized. And we as a community can use the practice of finding the balance between chesed and Dean, for the world and for ourselves. The repetitive reminder of the 13 attributes is an invitation to all of us today, or really tomorrow, to temper Dean. Over and over again, we are asking the Holy One to be more compassionate and less reactive. And with a wink, we're asking that of ourselves. So why then, given the need for this balance, is Rosh Hashanah called Yom Hadin? Who is doing the judging? And whom are they judging? And why? Once a year at this auspicious time from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, the liturgy explains that we journey like a flock of sheep before our shepherd, and we are judged. We will hear of this judgment in the Unatana Tokef prayer, which we will be reciting in the upcoming Musaf service. It asks, who shall live and who shall die? Proclaiming that the measure of our merit and our misdeeds will impact God's determination. The ancient poetry portrays a God who is literally judging us as tzaddik, as righteous, as rasha, as evil or critical, or as benoni, somewhere in the middle, morally non-binary, if you will. You'll notice this image has nothing to do with self-judgment and nothing to do with judging others. It's actually God's judgment that we are meant to encounter today. At which point I imagine you are asking, is that any better? Well, for the last 6 months, I have been on sabbatical. It was an incredibly spacious time for which I am incredibly grateful to this community and to the board and the staff for making it possible. It really allowed me to reset my nervous system after 10 rigorous years of rabbiing and parenting. And I want to share with you a little glimpse of it. Among the things I did on my sabbatical, I returned to the gym after a long pandemic hiatus. I read a good handful of graphic memoirs. I went to a 2-week meditation retreat. I coached Little League. I researched a gray water system for my house and then decided against it. I spent a Friday at the DMV and got a non-binary driver's license. I spent a lot of time with friends that I hadn't seen in years. I listened to the podcast Dolly Parton's America twice. I highly recommend it. With the help of a friend, I built a cedar chest for Shosh's hand-knit sweaters. I went camping in the Smoky Mountains where I swam in lakes and rivers. And last but not least, I spent several afternoons a week studying with my teacher and chavruta, Rabbi B'nai Lappi. Yes, that's my idea of fun. For several months, we immersed ourselves in the teachings of Maimonides, retranslating portions of Hilchot Tshuva, a text specifically about the path of return. I know many of you have been studying this text with Rabbi Mo and myself throughout this month of Elul or in years past. In this time, I came to appreciate that it's actually my life's work to live inside of this text. As B'nai and I labored to understand and translate these words, I found myself connecting to the unexpected relief, looking forward to Rosh Hashanah, when God would judge me. How surprising. My shoulders softened. Being able to see it in advance, I noticed a levity deep in my belly. I almost felt giddy as I read the words of the Unatana Tokef and Maimonides' understanding of them. I looked up at B'nai and I said, "This frees me from having to judge myself." And it frees me from having to judge my friends and my family. Phew. Turns out, it's not our job to judge others, and it's not our job to judge ourselves. That's God's job. We're not very good at staying in our lane. So what if Yom Hadin? What if the reason we're all here is an invitation not to judge ourselves and not to judge one another, but to spiritually delegate the work of self-judgment to the source of all, the Holy Blessed One. To the one who is El Rachum Vechanun, infinitely compassionate, to Av Harachaman, the source of compassion itself. To imagine the Holy One as our greatest teachers, grading our tests. The Holy One who knows all of your secrets, who knows the fullness of your story, who was with you when you were in your history. The Holy One has a more compassionate and a more comprehensive view of who you are as a person than you do and than any of us do. The Holy One is the one who knows what it has taken for you to survive and what it takes for you to thrive. God is more equipped to judge us than we are. So the rabbis gifted us with being able to take off the burden of self-judgment. Now maybe you're asking, don't we need like a little self-judgment to become better people? Isn't that also why we're here, to become more self-aware? Aren't we supposed to do cheshbon hanefesh, to take an account of our souls? Yes. A certain amount of self-awareness, maybe even self-scrutiny is helpful, but not more than that. With practice, we can come to know the difference between self-judgment and self-awareness, and that difference is crucial. Now, inevitably, when we consider the idea of delegating the role of judgment to the Holy One, many of us are going to imagine God to be as harsh with ourselves, as harsh with us as we are with ourselves. But what if that's not true? What if we're completely missing the point? We are, after all, asking God, our devoted shepherd, to be gracious and compassionate, and by extension, we're inviting ourselves to do the same. But this isn't an easy task. I know many of us are atheists or agnostic. I know most of us are still searching for a concept of the divine that is even relatable. I want to assure you that if you do not believe in God, if you do not even want to believe in God, I invite you to imagine surrendering your judgment to something beyond yourself. Perhaps replace God with the most expansive, well-rested part of yourself. Delegate this to your relaxed subconscious that is not easily accessible on a daily basis, but with hours of song and a lot of good food can arise. Perhaps delegate the role to the natural world, releasing judgment to the earth, to a forest, to a flowing river, to a slow exhale. Or delegate this job to the community, to the way that your voice melds with others, to the knowing that you belong, that you are part of something much larger than yourself, something that forgives you and sees the best in you. We forgive you. We see the best in you. Whether or not we believe in God, we undoubtedly arrive here today with our own tightly wound tangle of anxieties, well-worn habits of mind and body. And it is unlikely that we arrive with a concept of the divine that we can trust and take refuge in. But today we are invited to try, to trust that the Holy One sees the best in us. This Yom Hadin, we are encountering the judgment of Av HaRachaman, a profoundly compassionate and loving judge. The work of the 10 days is not to quell self-judgment, but to notice it and release it to the one, or to the one part of you that can hold it more spaciously. To take a compassionate stance towards even the judgment itself, to notice it like a practice, when it arises and when it passes, again and again. When the negative self-talk gets loud, which it often does, we can remember that it is balanced by the force of chesed in our lives. We can find ways to care for ourselves and others to actually metabolize the deen. When I am most anxious, I go out of my way to figure out how to express care because it helps to temper my own judgment. And the good thing is that the order of operations on Kol Nidre ensures that we will be forgiven. It's not a question, it is a given. The words of the Machzor and the hours of singing are designed to physically help us to connect to a more spacious place in our hearts and our minds, and maybe even to have the courage to recover a concept of the divine who will judge us graciously. May our collective presence encourage us to experience what it feels like to be judged favorably, so we are more able to offer compassion and generosity to ourselves and to each other all year long. I offer you one more story before I close. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, in his book Jewish Wisdom, tells the story of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, the leader of the new Jewish movement in the 19th century Germany, known as Orthodoxy. Thank you, I got one giggle about that. Yeah, Orthodoxy is way newer than the name Yom Hadin. Raphael Samson Hirsch surprised his students one day when, as he neared the end of his life, he insisted on traveling to Switzerland. Perplexed, his students asked him why was such a journey so important at this moment. In response, he explained, "When I stand shortly before the Almighty, I will be held answerable to many questions. But what will I say when God asks, and God is certain to ask, Shimshon, did you see my Alps?" Hirsch, Rabbi Hirsch, Zichrono Livracha, in imagining himself at his final Yom Hadin, his judgment day, points us to a radically different theology. To quote my teacher, Rabbi B'nai Lappi, Hirsch points us to a God who doesn't just want us to follow the rules, but one who wants, maybe needs us to drink deeply from the well of possibility, the well of beauty, of wonder, and potential good that make up our world. I think the early rabbis of the Talmud were onto this very same theology. In the last 3 lines of Tractate Kiddushin in the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, we read about Olam Haba, about the world to come, and that moment when, in the rabbi's imagination, we die and we will come before our final judge. The Yerushalmi teaches, Atid Adam liten din vecheshbon al kol ma shera'ata einav velo ukal. In the world to come, each of us will be taken to task, will be held accountable, not for the ways that we missed the mark, but for all the good, for all the delicious things in this world that our eyes saw but of which we didn't eat. I am so much more accustomed to imagining a God who is disappointed at my impatience and imperfections, when in fact the rabbis are reminding us that what's important to the Holy One, what it means to live into our dreams of the world to come, is to take notice of beauty, to prioritize joy, to imagine God's levity and longing for us to each feel ease and delight. This Yom Hadin, may we have the courage to judge ourselves less harshly for the bad things we have done, and to wonder more about the good things that we have not yet done. May we have the courage to delegate the work of judgment to the one who can hold it tenderly, so we can more fully enjoy the goodness that is in us and in our lives. To close, I offer you the immortal words of Salt and Pepper. There's only one true judge, and that's God. So chill and let my Father do his job. Shabbat Shalom. Añana buena, dulce y alegre, Lashana tova tikatevu. May we all be written for a year of life. Amen.
Hi.
We now continue with the Musaf service.